Good evening and welcome to True Scorpion TV 1954. Today we talk about the critical racism. This is a rebroadcast for educational purposes only. Please like, share, and subscribe.
America is systematically racist and critical race theory would support the idea that it is.
So, what are your thoughts on people who are pushing back on this being taught in school? They're racist. Go Just a little bit. Go ahead, Nicole.
First of all, I find it terribly amusing that America, white people in general, in 2021 are still debating whether or not America is racist. That's something that only white people do because apparently it's obvious. You know, the history is obvious, and it's not just America, it's every white country. And the fact that we have the capacity to debate upon this, if the truth should be taught in schools, is absolutely deeply racist and disgusting. Also, for me personally, I find the word critical race theory, I find it's like trivializing the problem because it implies that it's a theory that could actually be debated upon, which it shouldn't be. It's not a theory, it's a fact. So when they want to teach critical race theory, it shouldn't be a theory, it should be the truth, it should be the fact. So the way I'm seeing America, or even Germany, which is the motherland of racism, as we all know, I doubt that even if it is being enabled in schools, I still doubt that it's going to be the truth because as we all know, we are all having history lessons, right? And it's still bullshit. So what makes us think that a system that was built and is enabled on racism is going to teach us the truth about the crimes we are still enabling today? So,
Thank you, Nicole. Go ahead, Laurel, and then I'll let Lisa go. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I just wanted to jump on something that Nicole said quickly, where you talk about like what makes us think, right, that like if we're a racist society, how are we ever going to grow from that or change from that? And I think that the people, in this case, it's a lot of Republicans, white and black, across the board, it doesn't matter, who are fighting back against this. I think that it really speaks to, first of all, I think it's very intentional, right? I think a lot of the conversation, we kind of talk, oh, maybe they just don't know what it is. I think they do know what it is. And I think there's really something to be said for the fact that American history has been taught, it's completely been whitewashed, which has been very demoralizing and dehumanizing, right, to BIPOC. And for us to learn critical race theory in schools or what have you, the truth, it would give us a sense of identity that would enable us essentially to fight back against this racist system. And so I think that's what a lot of the pushback is against violence.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa, and then Aisha.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the roots of critical race theory and disagree that it's something that was founded in the 70s. It did come out of Germany with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels when they wrote their book, The Communist Manifesto. And they actually proposed a movement that was called critical theory. And then it was adapted in the United States to be critical race theory. But the roots of it are communism and socialism that did come out of Europe. So I'm always pushing back on the understanding that you're telling me that a theory that came out of Europe is the solution to racism in America.
Hi guys, my name is Abby. I've cared for over 12 families in the past 3 years, so I have some experience having the awkward conversation about payment. Now, some nannies and babysitters.
Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead, Aisha.
Okay.
And I'll let you respond and check you.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will respond to you, Lisa, but I had a different point to make. Interestingly enough, this is obviously not the first time that critical race theory being in the public school systems has come up. And even in 2020, Donald Trump, and I think a lot of us know this because it made the headlines, he canceled funding for he issued an executive order canceling funding for any program that mentioned white privilege or critical race theory. Of course, Biden reversed it. But the reason I bring that up is because there's this idea that if we don't talk about white privilege, if we don't talk about institutionalized racism, if we pretend it doesn't exist, then we can allow these systems that are very much in place, these legal systems, these economic systems that are very much in place to perpetuate them through generation to persist. And I think that our most recent election really lit a fire under people who are opposed to these kinds of programs, because our most recent election, the outcome was really defined by people of color voting in large urban areas. And so obviously the reaction to that was to go ahead and adjust the voting laws so that it makes it harder for marginalized people to vote. Because what we're seeing is this shift in America. We don't want a more educated electorate. We don't want more open-minded electorate, because we're at a place where democracy is not working for us, because democracy does not guarantee that the powers that we want to be in power will remain there. Right now, white people are becoming outnumbered, and so they're concerned that democracy is not going to maintain their interests in the legal structure. And so that's why I think we're seeing the rise of fascism in America, the rise of even more nationalism in America, and again, pushback against this program and any other similar programs where the goal is to really sustain democracy through the public school system by teaching about institutionalized racism, to create a more diverse and open-minded and compassionate electorate. That's not what America wants at this point. I think that's why you're going to continue to see this pushback.
Thank you, Aisha. Treasure, did you want to respond to Lisa's comment about the origin of critical race theory?
Yeah, because a lot of Republicans and like far right or conservative, what have you, actually utilize that language that it comes out of Marxism, it comes out of socialism, in order to discredit critical race theory. And this is why I said at the beginning that actually what's taught in schools is not critical race theory, it's critical race studies, and that could be a plethora of things in regards to race. The reality and what conservatives want to stop is the truth from being taught. I mean, the language in a lot of the bands is to ban any belief system or any theory system that teaches that that there's one group of people that have caused the problems for another group of people. Racism, slavery, all of these things are creations of white people, and they are trying to make sure that that's not taught in schools because it affects the bedrocks of power. And I want to even tie this into what Aisha is saying. It's not that they're trying to withhold democracy; they're trying to uphold white supremacy. So when people talk about how critical race theory is out of critical theory from Karl Marx and from the communist movement and from the socialist movement out of Europe, and it's not the answer. Sure, we can remove the term critical race theory. What about intersectionality? What about all the theories in regards to race? What about all of the things that we have come to realize that America is an inherently racist, white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist country that is fucked up and needs to be reworked? It doesn't change. We can call it all we want. It doesn't change that, and that's what they're fighting. And we know that because every time truth comes out, there is a movement to bury it again.
Thank you, Chechi. Lisa, did you want to respond, or anybody else who kind of disagrees with critical race theory? Go ahead.
Oh, yes, definitely. I definitely want to address that. Let me start specifically by giving some of my background, because I don't think anyone here knows me. And my background, I actually call myself a former liberal, so I do acknowledge that, and turned free market education activist. But I want to tell a little bit about the former liberal. The former liberal, I was the president of the ACLU in Kansas City for 2 years. I co-founded the Racial Justice Task Force. I was the affirmative action officer for the ACLU. I sat on the affiliate board of the ACLU, and I sat on the national board of the ACLU. So no one is going to label me a white supremacist and not get called out about it. It makes no sense. It is completely illegitimate on all counts, period. Now, my problem with critical race theory is that when you scratch the surface, you find that it's actually the black demoralization project or the black inferiority project, because all you're asking me to do is to sit my kids or my nieces and nephews in a classroom and be told for 13 years that another group of people were successful while we were inferior. And it leaves out all of the amazing stories that we don't learn about. We don't learn about Booker T. Washington. We don't learn about what it took for him to found Tuskegee. We don't even learn what the president of Harvard said in 1905. The president of Harvard spoke at Tuskegee, and he acknowledged that Tuskegee had produced more millionaires than Harvard, Yale, Princeton combined. So less than 50 years after slavery, we had black institutions that were producing millionaires at a rate higher than the Ivy League. So critical race theory does nothing to address that. I don't need to demoralize my kids or demoralize white kids. I need to get the truth out there. So if we're really about the truth, I really say critical race theory doesn't go far enough. Why don't we build our own schools? We have the HBCUs. Why don't we build HBCUs as well? That is meaningful change. Now you don't have to be a backseat driver where you're telling other people how they need to have a curriculum. Why don't we take ownership and control? That's something that Malcolm X would have proposed. That's something that Marcus Garvey would have proposed. Again, I don't need to demoralize white children or black children. I have white children in my family, and at this point in America, most of us do. And I don't want my nieces and nephews, no matter what color they are, to sit there and be demoralized on a daily basis when we could be proposing something positive, something where we have ownership and control of.
Thank you.
Hey, this is what I do almost every weekend, shop in real estate. You're probably not going to start with that deal right there, or the one that I'm standing inside of right now, Sunday morning. But you need to start somewhere, okay? In about a week, less than a week actually, I'm going to be doing a live training for free, show you how to get started in the real estate game. I started exactly the way I'm starting right now, which is walking properties, looking at deals, hanging with my wife right there, underwriting deals, checking out locations. It's so simple to do this. You don't need money, you don't need credit, you just need to start. And I want to show you how to start. It's completely free training, take about 120 minutes of your time, and I'm gonna put you in the game, I guarantee.
I don't have no white kids in my family. Just wanted to say that.
Go ahead,
Not
Melissa.
yet.
No, we won't at all. Go ahead. Melissa, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to push back on this whole idea of white privilege. So my name is Melissa Tate. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I came to the United States at the age of 19, college. And I came here with literally nothing. I came here at a time when my country was going through a Marxist collapse due to the same type of racial rhetoric that I'm seeing right now in the United States. That's why I actually wrote a book about it. I wrote a book and it's called Choice Privilege. So it is a play on the words white privilege. I cross out where it says white and I put in choice, because it's not really the choice. It's not really the color of your skin that determines your destiny in America, but it is the choices that you make, and that has been my experience. So as a black person, I came to the United States at 19 years old with $800 in my pocket. Okay, I went to school. I worked hard. So while some people were twerking at the club, I was working, feeding my working hours and whatever. Staying up all night, okay? I graduated with 9 colors with a business degree. I was able to get a job. Let me finish. I was able to get a job.
And so for those of us who have family who descended from slaves and grandparents who were sharecroppers, and yes, my parents are professionals and I went to college and everything, but to say that race has nothing to do with it, my grandfather's a brilliant man. Unfortunately, because he was born in the Jim Crow South, he wasn't able to do what I was able to do. And I just think it's an insult.
Aisha, can you hold that thought until Melissa gets back?
I'm sorry. She didn't need to, we don't need to broadcast that. That's just something I had on my chest.
We'll go to the
Aisha, you was probably twerking in the
Because,
club.
First of all, there's nothing wrong with a little twerk. I know plenty of college-educated, PhD degree-educated people who twerk a little bit. I go to salsa.
Twerking is good for your back.
Okay, I'm
Good for your back and flexibility.
Okay, let's settle. Melissa, did you fix your audio?
I think so.
Perfect. Okay, you can finish.
Are you hearing me now?
Yeah, you can finish
perfectly. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I had to run downstairs because my little daughter was coming up here, but so I'm going to be a little bit out of breath. But basically, what I was saying was, by the time after 3 years into working for a really good company as an investment advisor, I started my own business. So by the time I was 27 years old, I had a business that was doing 7 figures in income at 27. So when I hear this narrative that America is systemically racist and oppressive to Black people, it's something that doesn't resonate with me at all. And I think it's something that actually cripples the minds of young people to that they can't succeed because of the color of their skin. So like Lisa was saying, this is the
I see everybody's hands.
Project, in my opinion. I'll let somebody else talk so I can get my breath.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Go ahead. I see everybody's hands. Go ahead, Cassandra.
Thank you. So I think there's a difference between critical race theory assuming that Black and brown folks can't be successful versus just stating the realities of how the country actually operates, and comparing capitalism and being able to be successful in a capitalist environment, not the same thing as critical race theory. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing, I want to answer, Ashley, your question earlier about why do we think that there's pushback? I think it's by design. I think that because of the misconceptions of what critical race theory or just education on racism actually is by design. I mean, historically, it was white folks who created the Board of Education, and a lot of the people who sat on the Board of Education were the daughters of the Confederacy, and they were the ones who created what was actually put into historical record. So when we're talking about the United States in particular, we're literally talking about white people creating the history books for us. So it's really literally beyond race. It's literally who is actually telling the story and the narrative, and who is getting away with telling people who is actually successful and who is oppressed. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is, I think that, critical race theory also does a really good job of talking about oppression and oppressed. And I think that scares a lot of people. But beyond that, it also, to I think Uchechi's point, is no one is saying that Black and brown people can't succeed, or that they've never been successful, or that, Black and brown people have never, made any successful endeavors in society, right? Or that they've never been inventors, or that they've never been happy, right? No one is saying that, but I think we have to start getting really clear as to what the oppressor and oppressed complex actually is. And white supremacy actually creates the structure of superiority versus those who are oppressed underneath them. And so it creates the system where literally people cannot thrive to the degree in which everybody can thrive because of race and because of skin color and because of things like ethnicity that also compound on top of race as well. We have created, and I really shouldn't say we, white supremacists have created the Black-white binary structure. So it makes it incredibly difficult to have conversations around identity without somebody's feelings getting hurt, because inevitably you have to talk about oppressive ancestors and oppressed ancestors. And so when we start thinking about, why is this a debate when it really shouldn't be a debate, it's actually by design. We have white supremacists who are writing our narratives and who are teaching our children. And it's really up to everybody to decide, are we going to continue being a society that does that to people, or do we really want everybody to thrive? And in this current society, that's not the case.
Thank you. Go ahead, Zach.
I just wanted to start off with saying that number one, twerking is good for the back. It helps to build stamina as well as flexibility. But beyond that piece, I think that the understanding of critical race theory is, number one, being led to the wayside. I particularly like to think of it more as making sure that we're understanding that whiteness is not invisible, and to make it more visible. to be able to say that the default being white is actually a problem and does not actually help people to be able to thrive in the way that they could thrive. So one of the questions that I have often asked, and it's a play on the question that has been asked on Twitter before, was the question that they asked on Twitter was, women, what would you do if for one day there were no men? And the most mundane answers came out. I would go for a walk. I would wear that cute dress in the back of my closet without worrying about whether or not somebody was going to accost me on these streets. And I proposed the same question. What would Black people do if there were no white people for a day? What kind of stress would be relieved if for one day there were no white people? Critical race theory basically puts it back into play to say that we cannot continue to live in colorblind ways while continuing to support white supremacy in the way that we have. A critical paradigm actually gets us into thinking about who has power. Number one, what is power? Who has power? And in what ways is power utilized to keep those people continually in power? And when we're talking about these structures, what we're also talking about here is that there are systemic checks and balances to keep certain people in their place. And when we're talking about a hierarchy where white has been placed firmly at the top and Black has been placed firmly at the bottom, just because you're coming from a different country and are able to succeed doesn't mean that other people are not trying. It means that you are using now pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric to say that everybody should be able to achieve when everybody does not have equal opportunity to have access to achieve. The way that they even design neighborhoods, keeping trees out of urban areas where Negroes dwell, is to also make sure that we have gas, greenhouse gases in our spaces, and we don't have the full lung capacity to breathe the light. It's the reason why Flint exists. It's the reason why these things continually happen in the way that they do, because the system was already designed for it to go this way. So when I hear pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric, I am highly offended, because it continues to add into this rhetoric that poverty and racism is a problem of the individual and not the system that we're in. And considering that white supremacy is global and that there are third world countries, we have to be considering how white supremacy still plays into all of that. Critical race theory does not about having a defeatist attitude about what's going on. It is about being real about what is in the way, so that people who are choosing to do something different and to be able to speak to what is going on are able to see everything for what it is. And that particularly white people, because I don't know that critical race theory is really all that necessary for Black people. I think we know. We've been through this. I think that it is for white people so that they can get in the know and get out of our way, so that they can stop denying that they don't understand that racism actually exists. Because they knew last year when everybody was doing Black Lives Matter, and now this year it's, oh no, not critical race theory, because we don't want to teach people how to think. We like to teach them what to think.
Thank you, guys.
I digress.
Go ahead, Mouse. I see everybody's hand. Go ahead, Mouse. And then Victoria.
First I would say, if you don't think critical race theory is a real thing, you think it's just made up, if you think it's false, just look how hard Republicans are fighting. Nobody fights the boogeyman that hard if he doesn't exist, right? What nobody wants to look at is the mirror. I think about a few weeks ago when Kamala Harris, who is the vice president, and everybody was so happy. I remember she got up there and she said, America isn't racist. But when you ran your campaign, America was racist. When you ran your campaign, you brought up every shining, glimmering thing that said, oh no, America's racist and this is a problem, right? We gotta stop, and I mean, this is nothing new. We gotta stop coddling these white people. We gotta stop coddling these people who feel such a close proximity to whiteness. Listen, your job, it's good, but you ain't white. Your education, and just because you squint and look at the same thing we all looking at, it don't change the very real thing that race plays a huge part into all of this, especially specifically when we're talking about Black people. If you can look around and say, look at what I did, I came up and everybody else is fucked up, that would point to me, that would say, oh man, well, I don't think that's fair. I think I got to do something here to get everybody on the same board. Let's have this conversation when everybody's doing the same thing. When everybody's equal across the board, or everybody has the opportunity to be equal across the board, then I'll hear the bullshit. Then I will hear the, oh, you just didn't choose to do this. It's funny that Dr. Donna brought up Flint. The people raised in Flint, they didn't choose that. They didn't know nothing about it until it was brought to their attention that, oh, our water not supposed to be brown. If that is not a glaring, if that's not one big ass glaring red flag, if that doesn't wake you up and say, sister, brother, this is a very real thing, you should probably get on board, nothing will.
Thank you, Bounce. Go ahead, Victoria.
So first, I wanted to kind of backtrack to what I believe Lisa said in regards to what's being taught in the schools and the fact that they're not learning these Black stories or these harrowing stories of the Black experience from our own history. That's not going to change if we take critical race theory out of the schools. They're already not learning that, so it's not going to make it any better to take it out. You're just now robbing the students of the opportunity to make an educated decision moving forward. So when it comes to just stripping all of that information out of history, I mean, what else would be left about being Black? Honestly, what else would be left in history if we just stop talking about it? But I will say that critical race theory now, as it's been watered down throughout the millennia, to what we know of it today and how we use it today, it's almost just left it up to being us versus them. And that, taking critical race theory out of the equation, no one's going to end up talking about it. No level of white supremacy conversation is going to make anybody comfortable. But by saying, oh, we're just going to remove critical race theory, now you're just removing the option of even talking about moving forward. Like, critical race theory gave us the academic nomenclature to have a conversation about what has happened in history. It's not something that we can just throw away, but also moving forward from identifying the issue, we have to now come with solutions. And so I think that's where it's being missed at this point in our history.
Thank you, Victoria. You brought up a great point in terms of, you know, the us versus them narrative. A lot of the critique of critical race theory that I've heard from white people is that it makes white people feel bad about themselves. It makes, you know, white children feel bad about being white. What do you all think about that? Go ahead, Nicole. And then
Well, as you can obviously tell, I'm a white woman, okay? So, and when I read a lot about the critical race theory from different sources on America. I live in Germany, so I'm not really into the American system, but I know for a fact that all the sources I read and all the complaints, white people complaining that this is going to turn into a blame game and it's going to put guilt on the children, on white children's shoulders. This is ridiculous, because if Black children are old enough to experience racism, why are white kids not old enough to learn about racism? I have 3 mixed children. So if my kids go to school and I need to be afraid that Karen and Becky's children are going to be hurt in their feelings by knowing the truth of what we did to be where we are, then that's the wrong place, because the system doesn't give a flying fuck about the feeling of a Black child, but tries to cuddle and protect and kind of like, you know, trivializes the feeling of a white person. Why don't make them feel bad about themselves? Make them feel bad. We need to feel bad about ourselves to know that we literally ain't shit, because we wouldn't be where we are if we didn't exploit, enslave, kill, rape for centuries. We didn't come here by achieving things because we have such a great knowledge about history. We came here because the only thing we are actually good in is colonizing the world. So why in the hell wouldn't a white child know what their ancestors did? Because that white child is going to be a racist piece of shit tomorrow. So what's the need? How are we going to prevent these children into growing, being the next clan members? Is it not by telling them the truth? Is it not by making racism a crime? Is it not even, in fact, by dismantling the system and in its entirety? Because the system is fucked up, no matter where you look at. It's not only the school system, it's not only the history part of it. The whole system needs to be brought down and built again.
Nicole, you brought up an interesting point, because you are German, you're from Germany. what I understand about the German education system.
Let me give a shout out to the Grapevine. Please go to their channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
The Holocaust is taught thoroughly. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. And the thing is also that we paid millions of euros in reparations to the Jewish community. Up till today, we are still paying things. You know, we've never owned up to any of our crimes in Africa. We've never owned up to anything else but the Holocaust. But we have blood literally dripping off our hands in liters, you know. So we think about and we talk about all these things. Meanwhile, our neighbors, the Belgians, still have statues up there about that bastard that murdered millions of Africans. Statues of a murderer in Europe today. We've never owned up to anything we ever did. And that is not exclusive to Germany alone.
Thank you, Nicole. Go ahead, Aisha. Kevin, I'll let you go.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, if watching the Capitol being stormed at the beginning of the year was not a red flag that something needs to change, I don't know what is, because it was proof positive that there are people in this country who will burn everything down in order to uphold and sustain white supremacy.
True.
And so I think ultimately
So
the goal, the intent of programs like this, of critical race, and I like what Judge said, critical race studies, is unpacking racism, unpacking how the legal system, for example, upholds white supremacy, upholds these institutions, unpacking how the Homestead Act and the GI Bill gave certain families a head start, unpacking how slavery in the Jim Crow era held certain families back, unpacking the psychology of racism, how racism works. This is not the education anybody's going to be getting at home. Okay, so the only place that certain people will get it is in school, and it's at least attempting to make America slightly more fair and just a place. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say.
This is for
Second thing is,
educational
in
purposes
terms of
only.
white children feeling bad. First of all, I don't think that expanding the mind and opening yourself to new ideas should make anyone feel bad, but white supremacy makes black children feel bad, okay? Going to school with all white teachers, particularly white teachers that don't care about you, makes black children feel bad. I can remember teachers who targeted me because I was black and precocious and bright, and they made it their goal to break me, to break my confidence. Little did they know about the parents that I had at home. Seeing, only white characters in books, only being introduced to white history, only being introduced to white art, only being introduced to Western culture, only being introduced to Western philosophers, only seeing that aspect of history validated. What do you think that does to black children? Slavery being reduced to one page in the history book, right? And to your point about the Holocaust, I grew up in a town where there was a significant Jewish presence, and we studied the Holocaust every single year, as we should have, because we should never repeat something as such an egregious act of genocide. But it just goes to show that nobody questions that education. Nobody questions adding the Holocaust to the curriculum because we recognize the value in studying history in order to avoid repeating such heinous acts. And the last thing I want to say, because I know a lot of other people have things to add to that, is to Melissa, I've met women like you because I worked in news, and I understand your brand, and I understand what you're doing, and I wish you the best of luck. But
who am I to write a book? What if I don't have enough time in my schedule? I don't have a...
But the difference between me and you is that, yeah, I went to a great school. Yes, I run my own business. No, I don't twerk, not because I judge it, because I don't know how. But I also recognize that there are people who died. There are people who gave their lives so that we can have the legislation like the Civil Rights Act, like the Fair Housing Act, so that I could even attend the school that I attended to, so that I could even live in this white neighborhood that I live in. That I recognize that there is I'm standing on the shoulders of ancestors who didn't do nothing but survive and pass on another generation, who could then make America just a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. So for you to say that there is no racism, when to this day people are living their lives, first of all, people are losing their lives because of racism, but to this day people are dedicating their lives to making this system better and upholding the change that we have accomplished over the past 2 decades, so that you can sit from the comfort of your home and talk about your business and what you've done, because there is no racism. Recognize your privilege and pay homage to the people who died so you can have that privilege.
Thank you, Aisha. Melissa, did you want to respond? I think you're muted. Melissa, you're muted.
Okay, so just to push back on what Aisha is saying, at no point did I say racism doesn't exist. You know, racism has always existed. It's a sin. It's always going to be around. So the same way that we have jealousy, we have envy, we have all these types of evils in the world, racism exists. But my argument is that racism is not a barrier to success in the United States, okay? And the reason why I say that is because there is 100 years of history that is not taught in this country, that is not taught in mainstream America, because it's just been buried. And it's been buried by white liberals because they use Black people as weapons against white conservatives. And this comes from Martin Luther King, and this comes from Malcolm X, who says this. Because if you look at the history post-slavery and before the 1960s, Black people were thriving. They were building their own communities. It was during a time of segregation when real white supremacy actually existed, and there were millionaires being created. People were building amazing communities, Booker T. Washington built a university that had more millionaires, that were creating more millionaires than Harvard and Yale combined. Okay, so you fast forward to 2020 when systemic racism, I don't believe exists. Okay, because if there is systemic racism, then that would mean that people who are Black wouldn't be able to succeed, okay? So when you look at what you guys are talking about, you look at the systemic racism and the white supremacy, to me, it's like an argument that is used by the left, and it's been given to Black people as an identity, not because it helps them, but because it is something that they use. The left wants to tear down the American system and build up a Marxist system. So they're going to use Black people as weapons. They're going to indoctrinate them with this ideology of white supremacy, teaching Black kids that they're never going to amount to anything because they're Black, because there's this racist system that is out to get them. They're not succeeding. You know, I actually had that experience. I took my son to a school and they said they're going to have a teacher. This is before I even knew about white supremacy and you know, white privilege and all this stuff. And they said they were going to bring a white woman to tell my son about white privilege. So you're going to tell my son at the age of 3 that he's not going to succeed, or he has barriers in front of him. He's different from those white kids in his class. And you're going to tell him that he's different and he has a harder time achieving, or he may not even achieve his goal because of his brown skin. So to me, that is a departure from what Martin Luther King said. He said, judge people individually based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And right now we're talking about putting blame on something that happened in the past, you know, instead of judging people by the actions that are happening right now. Black Lives Matter is a perfect example of this. You know, most of the people that are killed by police, 19 people on average a year. So we look at that, and that's what we all focus on, because the liberal white media is the one that's pushing this out and making Black people march for this and whatever. Meanwhile, Black on Black crime, 8,000 people have died because of Black on Black crime. Okay, so you're comparing 19 people shot by police, usually for a good reason, because let me tell you, twice as many white people are shot by police. Okay, I just posted a video of a white person that was resisting arrest and they got shot by police. So to me, it's about actions. Oh, girl, are you going to school?
That talking point is so tired that I'm not going to rebuttal. But the way racism works is this, because you failed to mention Black Wall Street. That's a perfect example of how successful Black people can be, even when they have to create their own.
They can overcome.
And it was burned to the ground for no reason except for
Can we settle?
Just because people find their way around.
I'm not
Okay,
saying
I let
racism
you.
doesn't exist. Can I finish? Can I finish? I am not saying racism doesn't exist. Racism, and when it existed systemically, people were succeeding and had their own lives.
And still being murdered just because
you don't like white people. You
nasty.
can build your own.
Challenge something scary. Challenge.
If it avoids spilling some black blood, if you understand what I'm saying, right? Because the kids that we're so worried about, also we're talking about the Generation Z kids, who are probably smarter than any other generation of kids coming up. So there's that. But yeah, if me making little Jimmy or little Chet feel like a dickhead for the dumb shit he's doing, if that's gonna stop Chet from growing up to be a racist cop, I'm with that. You see what I did there? I'm with that. Make him fucking cry. Make him fucking cry, because that's gonna stop the bullshit.
Thank you.
And also, before I have to address this. Melissa, listening to you talk was kind of like listening to people that halfway know the Bible. You used Martin Luther King's quote, or you tried to use it, where he said, you should judge people by their heart, not the color of skin. He said he had a dream, okay? Which means in fucking reality, that's not the dream, okay? In reality, we're judged by our fucking skin color. Then, if you pass that fucking test, then just maybe they care about the merit. Okay, so I just want to make sure we're using things properly, because you used it incorrectly with a whole bunch of other words, but the church already got in that ass, so I'm going to leave it alone.
Thank you, Mouse. We're going to go to Maxine.
Hi. So I definitely agree with what Kevin and Mouse was saying about, like, you know, the concern of how it's being regulated. You know, that, you know, just with the education system in America in general, I'm always concerned of how it's being taught, because it's usually done lazily when it comes to any, like, thing that they're teaching kids. But when it comes to this, because it's such a sensitive topic, as we see now, it has to be done carefully, it has to be done correctly. But who is the one going to determine if it's correct or not? You know, is it going to be a racist white person whose their agenda is going to be to continue making black people feel small and uplifting white people, you know? Or is it going to be, you know, a black person who is not really understanding of their history or anything, or that they even have an inferiority complex? Like, who is going to be teaching our kids, you know? Also, it doesn't benefit, like, the white people who are pushing back, right? I guess Republicans, because there's, you know, a variety of people, but the people who are pushing back on it, why are they pushing back? It doesn't benefit them. You know, it doesn't benefit them to teach black people that, hey, you know, you're not inferior. Like, you know, there's more to your history. You know, there's more to what you've been taught. It doesn't benefit them to educate white kids about what really happened, like what their ancestors did, which is completely and utterly wrong. You know, I do think with the critical race theory, if it's going to be applied in everything, it should be done carefully. It should incorporate empowering history of black people. It should incorporate what our, you know, white people have done. It should dictate the history accurately and objectively. So that way, you know, no matter what skin color you have, it is taught with an objective viewpoint and not a bias, you know? So that's what I feel when it comes to, that's what I feel when it comes to teaching critical race theory. Like, it has to be done carefully. It's not like any other subject like health or anything. This is something that's sensitive for both parties, but especially black people, because we have literally built everything in this country You know, everything in this country has been built off of our backs, off of our ancestors' backs, and everything. And so, have to pay, as I think Aisha said this, we have to pay homage to our ancestors properly because they fought for us to be here. You know, and I think it's important to address CRT with care. You know, it's not something we can brush off, and we have to be careful on how it's regulated.
Thank you, guys.
Again, shout out to the Grapevine, and that ends my broadcast. Please hit like, share, and subscribe. Cash App, $, True Scorpion 1954. Thank you.